Hey guys, welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. We were not here last night. We were enjoying our turkey dinner, but we're back tonight and we have a really, really great show for you. Tonight we're going to be joined by Reb.ekah Koffler. She is a former high-level U.S. intelligence officer who was born and raised in the Soviet Union. She's the author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Reb.ekah was run out of the intel community for sounding the alarm over the U.S. antagonizing Russia. She accurately analyzed the various moves the U.S. was making that would ultimately provoke Russia. And when she kept telling them, hey, this is going to lead to war, they scoffed and they kicked her out. She accurately predicted the war in Ukraine, not only in the intel community before she was ousted, but also in her book, Putin's Playbook, which came out in July of 2021. She has a new edition of this book coming out in March of 2025 that is going to include the latest war in Ukraine. But this particular book came out in July of 2021, and she predicted the war itself, the invasion itself. Because Reb.ekah is Russian, she understands Russian mentality, culture, history, and language. She says she knows what Putin is thinking, not just as an analyst, but as someone who's lived the history that shapes his worldview. She is anti-establishment, anti-war, America first. And I'm surprised, honestly, it's taken me this long to come across her great insights. Tonight, she'll tell us why she also predicts the war in Ukraine is going to turn into an actual hot war between the U.S. and Russia, how she thinks Trump could stop it, why she thinks NATO needs to stop expanding to continue, to stop provoking Russia. But also, she does think that it should remain in the current countries it's in, and what exactly she means by Russia's plan to defeat America. It's not exactly what you think. But before we get into the conversation, let's get to our sponsor. CB Distillery is having a massive Black Friday sale. Today's Black Friday, so save up to 60% off their entire site with promo code RUMBLE. If holiday chaos has you stressed out and sleepless, then bring back the merry and bright with CBD from CB Distillery. They have natural solutions for pretty much everything: stress, sleep, post-workout pain, even mood and focus. And it's all made with the highest quality, clean ingredients. And it's the perfect gift for those on your list who have everything. Stuff their stockings with better sleep and treat your gym buddies to less pain after exercise. Grab a little holiday calm for yourself. Members of the family love the sleep products that I get for them. So I always try to take advantage of these sales and stock them up. And right now we can save up to 60% during CB Distillery's Black Friday sale. So it's the perfect time to get all of your shopping done. Visit cbdistillery.com, enter code RUMBLE for up to 60% off. That's cbdistillery.com, code RUMBLE, cbdistillery.com. Reb.ekah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kim. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm really interested in this conversation, and I'll tell you why. You predicted in your book the invasion of Ukraine. Your book came out in July of 2021. And when we saw the escalation, there was a period of time right before the invasion of Ukraine where the military industrial complex, we had all the mouthpieces of the military coming out saying, Russia's going to invade Ukraine, Russia's going to invade Ukraine. And I have to tell you, because I'm so skeptical of the military industrial complex, and I think that they look for war wherever they can possibly look for war, and they always kind of create narratives in order to pick fights. I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that Russia was actually going to invade Ukraine. And obviously, I was very wrong on that. But others, and there were a lot in my crowd, in my, I know you also come from an anti-war, anti-establishment perspective, but there was a lot of us in that group that really were skeptical that, oh, come on now, Russia's not the big bad guy. They're not going to be invading Ukraine. And they sure did. And you were able to predict this. So you have a unique, a different viewpoint, being Russian born and also having been a U.S. intel expert. Give us, how did you know? I want to get into your background and all of that, but first just kind of give us like the quick elevator. How did you know he was going to invade Ukraine?
Oh, it's very simple, Kim. I spent my intelligence career on the Russia and Putin target. Russia and the United States have been on a collision for decades. And the reason why military-industrial complex knew that Russia was going to invade Ukraine is because they actually pushed Putin to invade Ukraine. So going back to how I knew, again, I was watching the intelligence coming in, and what Putin was doing, he was watching what the United States has been doing for the past quarter of a century and all the military campaigns that we conducted, beginning with the Kosovo and the destruction of or fracturing of Yugoslavia in 1991, then Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. It's the same. The Pentagon has the same playbook, right? And Putin saw that, and he saw that the policy that the White House was pursuing, regardless, actually, whether it's a Democrat or Republican who sits in the White House, the policy has been consistent. Russia policy that the United States has been pursuing for half a century, actually, is to democratize Russia's post-Soviet space. What is post-Soviet space? It's countries like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and basically the strategic security perimeter that Russia has relied on for centuries for its security. It's their version of the Monroe Doctrine. And so we try to bring democracy to countries that have never seen democracy in their life, will never become a democracy. Ukraine, by the way, is not a democracy. We can get into that why later if you'd like. And so the Russian General Staff has concluded that the war between the United States and Russia is actually inevitable. That's a quote, inevitable, because Putin knew he was not going, and that's why he said, it's a red line, it's a red line, it's a red line to bring Ukraine into NATO, because you would have NATO military hardware on Russia's doorstep. He always knew he's going to fight tooth and nail, and that's how I knew that there's going to be a war, because neither Washington nor Moscow wouldn't stop. And we continued to push and push and push. And then Putin, saw that we were not listening to him after he kept saying it's a red line. And then boom, in February, and actually I predicted it way early in the intelligence community. No one wanted to listen. Then I predicted it in my book. And the DA actually tried to kill my book. So, and there we go. Then boom, February 2022, he did it.
Tell us about when you were in the intel community and you voiced all of this and they ousted you.
Yes. So basically there was a small, well, first of all, the intelligence community is full of people who are incompetent, just like the U.S. government. There's a handful of very dedicated, smart, honorable officers, but there's also a lot of people who are hired from, Ivy League school, Harvard and Yale, and they think they know everything, but they actually don't, because the Russians don't think like Americans. That is first. The Russians think like Russians. Chinese think like Chinese, right?
Right.
And so on and so forth. And so intelligence does not come in the English language. Imagine that. It comes in, when there's an intercepted phone call, it comes in Russian or in Chinese. But they have people who've never set their foot in the country, don't speak the language, don't understand the mindset, and they may do analysis trying to predict what a foreign leader is or is not going to do, or what this missile system or that missile system is going to do or not. And I started challenging them when people told me, and I warned about, let's say we see something going on in space, right? Let's see the Russians are maneuvering a specific satellite, and space warfare is part of Russia's warfighting strategy, right? And that was my first account to be on the Russian space doctrine. And I would say, hey, people, the Russians are maneuvering this satellite, and here's what that means. And I would be told, don't worry about it. That's strategic targeting. Well, what's strategic targeting? Strategic targeting means that it's not going to happen today or tomorrow, but eventually it's going to happen, right? And I would say, do you hear yourself? Like, don't worry about it, seriously. And that is, and then eventually, like, the people who saw that I actually know what I'm talking about, and I'm not afraid to speak truth to power, started inviting me, and I briefed Obama's National Security Council, not just one time, but multiple times at the super classified level, way above top secret. I briefed NATO. Just a couple of months prior to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, I briefed Stratcom Commander 4-star. Stratcom is strategic command that guards our nuclear arsenal, EUCOM, NORTHCOM, you name it. But we war gamed it. But eventually because my analytic line did not jive, so to speak, with Obama's policy at that time, who wanted to be friends with Putin. Remember, he promised Medvedev, who was president for a short time, he promised to him to be more flexible with Russia. He got caught on a mic, right? They didn't want to hear that. And then eventually I was booted out in the most brutal way. And they yanked my security clearance, basically made me unemployable in my field. And so that's when I decided to write a book where at the unclassified level, I described Putin's mindset, his thinking, his warfighting strategy, and why, Putin developed a plan to defeat America. It doesn't mean that the Russians going to come and, invade literally the United States. But what it means is because Putin predicted what we are going to do. So he developed an escalation, or on his orders rather, the general staff, an escalation ladder, which ends up in a nuclear war because he can't possibly allow NATO as close as 100 miles to Moscow and St. Petersburg. So the distance between NATO and Russia's top cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, has reduced with the collapse of the Soviet Union from 1,000 miles to 100 miles. That's a shorter distance than between Washington, D.C. and New York City, right? We wouldn't allow such kind of proximity, like if Russia or China or Iran decided to get as close as Canada and Mexico, and hopefully we would be fighting if they tried to do that with all we've got, and so do the Russians. But the establishment didn't want the American people to know this, so they created this narrative that there's a democracy, they're fighting for democracy. It's not a democracy. Zelensky is a miniature Putin, and I can explain why that is. So that's the story.
Reb.ekah, just real quick, you're shaking your camera a little bit, like when you're hitting your desk or laptop or something along those lines.
Got you.
And it's kind of jiggling the camera.
Got you. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to sit. Right. I get upset.
Okay. So you're saying that Putin accurately has been predicting all of the steps of the West, and with those, so no matter what the narrative has been, because Obama was saying, we want to be friends with Russia, we want to rebuild these relationships, but you're saying that Russia didn't buy that. Why? And so Putin was able to accurately predict, the U.S. is just going to keep doing what the U.S. is doing, no matter what they say. I mean, am I getting this right? So why wouldn't Putin just say, well, maybe this new administration actually does want to make, wants to have better relationships, or explain how he knew that even with the rhetoric from Obama, he knew that nothing's going to change.
Because Putin does not trust words, he trusts action. And what he has seen, I described what he has seen, that the United States, was engaging in these military campaigns all over the world, and coupled with the rhetoric that was coming out of the White House, and coupled with the pursuit of Moldova, and the Baltics were actually, the Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania were absorbed into NATO, right? And so, besides, the Russians believe that it is because of the United States, and correctly so, right, that the USSR collapsed in 1991. USSR as a country ceased to exist, and so then so that's why he just simply does not trust. And he's a KGB operative, right? He does not, and he knew that ideologically, Russia and the United States are, on the opposite side of the spectrum. At least we used to be. And what do I mean by that? Russia believes in a strong government and strong state control. The United States, at least originally, was designed as a free country where the government is accountable to the individual. So, but we started pushing that ideology, and to them, it was destabilizing because Russia is a huge country, and it has experienced many, many, many wars throughout its history. And that's why, like, it always prepares for war. There's a presupposition of conflict. Peace is never really, it doesn't exist, that it's a constant confrontation. So, but just to nuance the reason why I said it used to be, United States used to be, a country of freedom, because that's the country I came from. That's the country that my mother always wanted to flee, Soviet Russia. But for the past several years, until, thankfully Trump is going to change that. But for the past several years, I felt like I was back in the Soviet Union with all the government control, right? With all this censorship, with everything that the deep state was going after Trump. So anyway, so right now we look more like Soviet Russia, but at the time, Putin, what he saw was that the United States is trying to peel off and to break the strategic security buffer and fracture Russia. And there's actually a policy that used to be highly, highly classified, and I described that policy in my book, where the Bush administration actually admitted that they were going to do everything in their power, including supporting national movements, to ensure that Russia will never reconstitute again a strong state, an empire kind of entity similar to the Soviet Union. And that's what was happening with Ukraine. The nationalistic movements, like the Azov Battalion, all the Nazis and everybody, they got galvanized, and that's why the CIA. There was a New York Times article that disclosed that the CIA was actually sending operatives in Ukraine to train them, and now we are all the way to having authorized Zelensky to use U.S. supplied ATACMS to strike Russia. So that's how we are on the escalation ladder. And it just confirms to Putin that everything he predicted is happening.
Right.
And that's why he never originally believed it.
Right. I mean, so it's, we can't really blame him.
It's not my job. It's not my job to blame anybody. I'm an intelligence officer, so we just basically say how it is. When we go brief the decision maker, we are nonpartisan. We just say, if you do this, the Russians are going to do this, or the Chinese are going to do this, and we tell them, this is the plan that Putin is developing. When we try to brief, let's say the Pentagon with the SecDef, we never actually got to even brief during the Obama administration. Even the Secretary of Defense, right? When we tried to wave the flag, like a small group of us, I was part of the top three. There was a very close team of us. They called us Troika, which means three in Russian. And we tried to brief them. And the Obama appointees in the Pentagon would say, "Why are you telling us about war with Russia? We're not going to go to war with Russia." And we would say, "Well, they think that you're going to go to war with them, so you might want to listen." But they were dismissive because they simply did not understand how their actions to democratize Russian post-Soviet space are impacting Putin. So again, I don't care about Putin. I mean, as far as I am concerned, I'm in the target list for both, with Russia and with the Ukraine, depending on. No, see, it's not finding him. I have to do some events. I have to bring security person because they are literally targeting me. So, anyways, it's I just say it how it is. Like I
Right.
don't care
Okay.
what he thinks, or I don't blame
Right.
anybody for anything. But this is the situation we are in. That Moscow and Washington did not want to reconcile their differences, and that's why we are effectively
Where
at
we're at.
war right now
Okay.
with Russia. This is what Putin has said as much a few years ago. I'm sorry, a
Is
few days ago.
right. No, it's very interesting that you, as an advisor, you're inside the intel community, you're an intelligence officer, and you're telling them these things. So you're telling us that these people in Washington are literally just ignorant. Because it just seems so obvious to so many of us that look at this escalation and what has gone on, that the expansion of NATO was very much the cause of this, that there was promises made of after the collapse of the Soviet Union that we would not be expanding, that we would not be encroaching on Russia's security. And yet the West did over and over and over again, completely just moved eastward and started absorbing a lot of the Warsaw Pact. And that really pissed off Russia. And that seems so obvious to so many of us that's obvious. Like we would never allow it to happen to our country, as you just laid out. We would never allow these nations to suddenly get into Mexico or Canada. Or it was a big crisis with the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was a crisis right there with Cuba. So that's obvious to, I think, just an average idiot. Like, how is it that Washington? So you're saying, because many of us have just thought Washington knew, they were trying to escalate. They didn't care. But you're almost saying, no, it's not that they didn't care or that they knew. They literally just didn't know. Like they're that incompetent.
So there are two parts to this, Kim. There are some people who are incompetent, but some people are smart and they're doing it deliberately
Okay.
because they are in bed, so to speak, with the military-industrial complex. Remember that the military-industrial complex is a huge part of the U.S. economy. This war has been, between Russia and Ukraine and the United States, sending billions and billions of dollars, U.S. taxpayers' dollars, worth of weaponry and cash to Ukraine, has been an enormous gravy train for the Lockheed Martins and the Northrop Grummons
Yeah.
of the
Well, even
U.S.
just the
And
Cold War was a gravy train. I mean, even before we got to the actual war with actual hot war with Ukraine and Russia, I mean, the Cold War was a gravy train. They had to keep making weapons.
absolutely, so yes, that's how they survive, and that's how the permanent government in Washington. And yes, I now having seen what I've seen, just like in Russia, there is a permanent government, the deep state, the administrative state in the United States. And those people, because it's a revolving door, right? There's a cadre that are a GS system, right? The general schedule, and they are career people. They're in the Pentagon, they're in every agency, and their livelihood depends on their ability to stay in those government jobs, and they do everything to dismiss, to destroy anyone who is challenging their competence or challenging their analytic line, or whatever that is that they're trying to pursue. And then there's another element. There's the political appointees, right? And the SES's level. And that is the revolving door. There's a cadre of those people. They serve in one administration, and then they go and they get a private sector job at Northrop Grumman or at Lockheed Martin. Look at Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Look at where he comes from. He comes from the military. Every person, and then they go work there, and then the administration changes, and then new people exactly from those circles, from those cadre come in, or they go. Some of them go into the think tanks, into the Heritage Foundation or the Atlantic Council, and it's a revolving door, right? So this is why the deep state is going after President Trump so viciously, with the viciousness, the same viciousness that Putin goes after his opponents, except Putin poisons people. But there were 2 assassination attempts on Trump, right? Why is that? Because Trump swore that he is going to dismantle the deep state, and they are frightened right now. So, circling
Hmm.
back, some incompetent, some deliberately, because that's their livelihood, that
Right.
gravy trade. They
So,
live on these wars.
sure. So when you were sounding the alarm and saying, "Hey, I'm a Russian, and so I know how Russians think, and you guys are on the path to war," when they booted you for that, did they boot you because they didn't believe you? Because Obama had this sort of reset the relationship with Russia policy. Was it that they didn't believe you, or was it that they didn't want you to let everybody know what was actually going on?
So it's I have certain hypotheses on this. Obviously, they didn't tell me the truth. They staged, like, there was almost like an intelligence operation staged against me to give them the justification to yank my security clearance. And it's all described in my book, by the way. I wanted to clear my name and get it on the record, right? What they did to me, so that Americans know. And my case is actually not the only case, Kim. You know how they went after General Flynn, who was my former boss. I was in his chain of command. General Flynn, whom President Trump hired first as his national security advisor, and then the FBI and the Pentagon ran an operation on General Flynn. They also booted out scores and scores of people. Rob Porter, who was briefing President Trump, giving him intelligence briefings every day, because Trump did not trust General Kelly and all these other mad dog Mattis, right? He trusted Rob. Well, they deep state started digging onto Rob. They booted him out. So I don't know whether they believed or not, but what I'm suspecting, the reason for the timing when I was booted out, it was right during the time when the deep state was concocting the fake Russia collusion theory, hoax, as Trump calls it, to prevent Trump from becoming president. Right at that time, right? This was about uh, 2015, right? So I was supposed to go on detail to the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. In the intelligence community, there's after the September 11th fiasco and the failure of the intelligence community to warn Americans about the terrorist attacks, even though we had all of the information in various parts of the intelligence community. Nobody put the pieces of the puzzle together, or maybe some people, just like with Russia, me and some other people were predicting it, but it never, surfaced up because there was a suppression of that analytic line. So the intelligence community decided to place people at senior levels like myself, and I was at a very high, like fairly high level, high grade of GS14, close to GS15, which is the top level before you become a CS, a political appointee. So they would decided to send different people at senior level to kind of cross-pollinate, right? And I won in a highly, highly competitive process, a position at the DNI as their number 2 for cyber, right? For cyber, I would have been a top person for cyber in the entire U.S. intelligence community. And I won that position, and they did not want to give it to me because, and my assessment is, they knew that A, I speak truth to power, B, I actually read Russian, I would have seen the exact intelligence, and and all the Russian collusion stuff would have come from the cyber area of the entire raw intelligence that comes in, right? Because of what happened, they were saying, oh, the Russians knew, they hacked the DNC, they hacked the RNC. RNC was better protected. I would have known exactly what happened and whether the Russians are in cahoots with Trump or not, and I would not tolerate the lies and I would not go along. That is my hypothesis why they threw me out at the time that they threw me out, because I would have disrupted the whole Russia-Trump collusion hoax.
All right, we need to take a little break for a sponsor. This October 15th, the deadline passed. Are you prepared for what's coming? Do you owe back taxes? Are your tax returns still unfiled? Did you miss the deadline to file for an extension? Well, now that October 15th is behind us, the IRS may be ramping up enforcement, and you could face wage garnishments, frozen bank accounts, or even property seizures if you haven't taken action yet. But there's still hope. Tax Network USA has helped taxpayers save over $1 billion in tax debt and has filed over 10,000 tax returns. They specialize in helping people like you reduce their tax burdens, and they can help you too. So don't wait any longer. Visit tnusa.com/Kim or call 1-800-958-1000 for a free consultation. Their experts will walk you through a few simple questions to see how much you can save. Act now before the IRS takes more aggressive steps. Take control today. Visit tnusa.com/Kim or call 1-800-958-1000. All right, now let's get back to our conversation. When did you start in the intel community here in the U.S.?
I started, I came in during the Obama administration in 2008, but it actually took me 7 years to get in. Speaking about how incompetent and how slow the government is, after the September 11th. So when I came into the United States, which was in 1989, I had a whole entire career in the telecommunications, satellite communication business because of my background, and everything in U.S. military strategy and military operations is highly, highly dependent, 100% dependent on satellites. So that was my background. After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, I decided to serve my adopted homeland. I wanted to become an intelligence officer, and I tried applying, and I got 5 job offers actually from the very top 3-letter agencies: CIA, NSA. NSA is the National Security Agency that is responsible for intercepting foreign communications. FBI, everyone knows who that is, and FinCEN, which is under Treasury Financial Intelligence Unit, and that tracks terrorist financing and other foreign adversaries of U.S. financing. But then they would start, looking who I actually am. I would have interviews and I would ace everything, but then they would say, "Oh, this one comes from Russia," and there was a concern, and they would drag on my background.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, after I got a job offer from DIA, I actually wrote letters to the directors of CIA and the DNI, and I said, "Look, you need a person like me. I don't know what y'all are doing there, but you clearly do not understand how foreign leaders think, and you don't understand how to actually get into their mindset and how to develop counter strategies to them and how to prevent war before it actually starts." And then finally, I was hired on at DIA, but then what happened, I already told you.
Okay. Tell us why you think Trump is different. Putin has said recently, before the election, he said, look, it doesn't matter who wins the election. He made a joke that, Kamala, I'm for Kamala. And then he said, look, I don't really care who wins. Nothing's going to change. And if anybody thinks that with Trump coming into office, it's going to make a difference, it's not going to make a difference. They're not going to stop giving weapons to Ukraine. They're not going to stop any of this. So that was his public statement. Why do you think Trump will be any different than any of these other presidents when the deep state is still there?
So, if I may, I'd like to answer the first part as what Putin thinks. He really, the Russians always prepare for both scenarios, right? Because they know that it's not in their power to choose a U.S. president; that it's the U.S. voter that chose the president. So what they do is they conduct psychological profiles of both candidates, and they have profiled Kamala Harris, the Russian intelligence services, as vapid, incompetent, and unintelligent. And what that means is it's easier for them to manipulate her. So the preference was for Kamala, even though they had to prepare for both. Trump, they profiled as unpredictable, which means that if and when Trump does engage in negotiations with Putin, it would be very difficult because Putin relies on manipulation and understanding the opponent so that he can deceive them, predispose them towards them. That's how he dealt with Bill Clinton. I actually have an article written on the Fox News website that Putin outplayed for U.S. president, and then Trump outfoxed Putin. So that's how Putin does it, outfoxes them. So with Trump, if Trump bluffs, the Russians are not certain that they will know whether he's bluffing or whether he's telling the truth. So Trump was successful in their first term, keeping Putin at bay. That's exactly why Putin did not invade any country. And I have another piece that describes that's why that is, because Trump actually pursued the most robust anti-Russia policy, and he's done several things. If you want to get into that later in the show, I can. 5 things. So, do I think that when Trump comes in and everything will change? Honestly, I hope so, but I don't know, Kim, because the deep state is so strong, and I've seen it, firsthand. I've
Right.
experienced that deep state. I know he's going to try to eradicate it, but believe me, those people are vicious and they're fighting for their survival, for their livelihood. So they are not stopping. I'm praying that President Trump actually survives the next 60 days, and actually does become president, because I'm worried that they're going to continue trying to get rid of him. So the thing is, the people even who are not deep state, if you see the people who are surrounding Trump, a lot of them are still pro-Ukraine, and some of them genuinely believe that Ukraine is a democratic country, even though Zelensky outlawed all other political, opponents. He has, like, Putin authorized assassinations. The intelligence services of Ukraine are grabbing right now Ukrainian men off the street to throw them into the battlefield, into Putin's meat grinder. This is miniature Putin, but some people just, again, like, don't understand it. So I do not know. I think Trump has said it very clearly that he wants peace in Ukraine, because 1 million men now between the Russians and Ukrainians are dead or gravely wounded, right? These are European child producing age men that lost their lives at the time when we have, certain lunatics running around Europe, basically, trying to impose their Sharia and all their nonsense stuff. So Trump understands the strategic implications of losing those million men, and having Ukraine being decimated and destroyed. 50% of
Right.
Ukrainian infrastructure is now destroyed. So I believe he'll do everything in his power. I also believe Putin is gonna it's going to be very tough to convince Putin to believe Trump, just because, Putin, like, look at what just happened. Biden, just 2 years ago, he told his donors, the DNC donors in New York, at a fundraising event, that the reason why he wasn't providing ATACMS back then to Ukraine is because he didn't want to start World War III, and that the threat of nuclear Armageddon was real when it comes to Putin and Russia. And then he did a 180. why would Trump believe? I mean, why would Putin believe Trump? He doesn't believe anyone. But if
Right.
Putin were to believe anyone, he would believe Trump, but he would verify, right? Because Trump is a business person, and Putin can be dealt with on a transactional basis. Because look, there are other dictators that we deal on a transactional basis. I mean, China's Xi Jinping. He's also just like Putin, yet we deal with him. So if Trump can
Hmm.
establish that kind of rapport with Putin, and he to some extent he already has, then it's possible. But honestly, I cannot, right now, I don't have a clear analytical on that. I just have a hope and an opinion.
Right. Well, we can all hope, that's for sure. I think we all have the same hope as you right now, because none of us want to see this escalate, especially into a nuclear direct war between the United States and Russia. But, looking at it from Putin's or anybody's perspective, Trump only has 4 years. That's it. And then he's gone. And somebody else has to come in, whether they be Republican or Democrat, and the establishment's on both sides and the warmongers are on both sides. And that could be anybody. It doesn't, so unless Trump is going to dismantle NATO and reel it back and say, all right, we're going to remove all of these countries from NATO and they're no longer going to be in it, all the ones that we've added since the 90s or whatever. I don't see, maybe we can chill the war for a couple of years, but I don't see how it really, if Russia's been playing the long game, like you were saying, over decades, Russia's been looking at the United States and all of the steps the US has made and NATO has made and said, it's inevitable we're going to end up in war with each other. 4 years is just a blip in this whole timeline. It's just a little hiccup of, well, there was that one time for 4 years where, we were able to kind of cool the jets for a little bit, but then the jets get fired back up quite literally 4 years from now. So I, and like I said, unless it's a total dismantling and something that can't be reestablished, it would have to be within 4 years a rapid dismantling of NATO. And Trump is not actually saying that. What Trump is saying about NATO is pay your fair share. He's a businessman. He's not saying we need to roll this back because we are really pushing ourselves to the brink of nuclear war. He's instead saying, pay up. America doesn't want to be footing the bill anymore. And that's two different things, because a lot of Europe right now is saying, okay, I guess we're going to have to pony it up. I guess we're going to have to be the ones that defend Ukraine. We're going to have to be the ones that step up and, take over the mantle of being the neocons around the world. I mean, that's Europe's mentality right now. So I just don't see, you even mentioned in your book that you predicted the war in Ukraine, and then you predicted that it would end up becoming a hot war between the US and Russia. I feel like your prediction is probably correct.
I
but
hope
what
not.
in your,
I'm praying that.
right, but in your mind, what are the steps that lead us to that hot war between the two countries?
Sure. So first, I'd like to mention something very important. You mentioned dismantling of NATO. I don't believe Trump is going to do that, and I don't think dismantling NATO is a good idea. And here's why. I believe NATO is a stabilizer, right? Because Putin is a kind of man, and any Russian leader is a kind of man, is a kind of like leadership that, because of Russia's history and because they've always relied on strategic depth to their security, they would, if we were to dismantle NATO, Putin or any Russian leader would jump in and try to swallow up the Baltics back and the Poland back, because they would see that window of opportunity that was just presented to them. Because again, they view, like I said, there's no peace. Even what we view as peacetime, they see as constant confrontation, that they think it's just a matter of time when somebody is going to try to invade us. Okay, from that standpoint, I believe President Trump is correct that all they need to do is pay. Germany, still the richest country in Europe, does not pay for its defense. And the reason why they decided not to, like, even they knew, right? Like I said, I briefed NATO summit style, right? In Brussels, this big room with flags, were laid out at a classified level what the strategy was, what Putin's plan were. They decided that, oh, it's too expensive, right, to beef up their force posture. They decided we're just going to throw Ukrainians, as human shields. That's what effectively Ukraine has been used for, as a human shield to protect the Europeans who didn't want to pay for their own security. If they start paying for their own defense, if they start contributing, then that's a deterrent in itself. And if they stop pushing, like, let's say, Russian strategic security perimeter countries into NATO, then we can have stability. Okay. Now, that is not on the table as far as I understand the geopolitical landscape right now. Now, to your questions, how do we get there? There's such a thing called the escalation ladder. It's a new type of war. The Russians call it new generation warfare. What they've seen us conduct is a no contact warfare, right? We lob, missiles into, let's say, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, dismantle their command and control, and then we go in and do stuff, and then we get bogged down there and stay for 20 years, let's say, in Afghanistan, $2.2 trillion, 6,000 American lives. Then we abandon them, and the same lunatics with towels in their heads, except with $85 billion worth of equipment, stay there. So that's our playbook. Putin does not want to do it that way, right? He wants to defeat the United States, but not necessarily do it with nukes. Ideally, he doesn't want it with nukes. And that's why they developed the escalation ladder and a 5-prong strategy. And that's what I describe in my book. And the 5 prongs are cyber warfare, space warfare, spies and disruptors, and then something is called active measures, which is election sabotage, and it's military and including nuclear. And all of these prongs are intertwined, and depending on what we do, the idea is to out-escalate the adversary. So, in a prime example we just had, when Biden authorized Zelensky to use U.S. ATACMS, the long-range missiles, to strike deep into Russia, and Zelensky took up Biden on his idiotic offer. What Putin has done, the very first day when that happened, he authorized the new updated nuclear doctrine, which lowered the threshold to use nuclear weapons. The reason he did that is, A, he wanted to have that ability to do it. And at the time, the Russian nuclear doctrine did not allow that, because to do it against Ukraine, because Ukraine is not a nuclear state. So the new verbiage is, if a country, even a non-nuclear country, attacks Russia, but with support from from a nuclear power, Russia is going to consider it a joint attack, and then it's going to target that country in return. Targeting does not necessarily mean kinetic. It can be non-kinetic, which is cyber warfare, space warfare, and that's how they climbed the escalation ladder. So what Putin did also is he authorized the Russian forces to launch a new experimental hypersonic weapon called Oreshnik to demonstrate, and there's a lot going on in that area, right? I have a piece published on Fox News this morning called "Putin's Fog of War Missile Confuses Experts, but That's His Plan." That launch was a direct signal to President Biden to withdraw that permission from Zelensky, or Putin is going to take this seriously and start targeting literally Europe and the United States, which his doctrine now allows to do. And step by step, right now, we're climbing that ladder, and that is exactly what we war gamed in the intelligence community. And every war game ended up in a nuclear war, right? That's how That's how it happens, because neither country wants to stand down. And if you think about it from this standpoint, you have two men right now, like when two fighters fight, right? It's very difficult, and the fight is very far along. Neither one of them can stop. If the United States stops, then they lose their face. They have an egg on their face. They lost to Putin. They don't want to hand victor to Putin. Putin cannot lose because it's an existential issue for Russia. He can't possibly allow Ukraine to be in NATO. And that's why we keep climbing and keep climbing and keep climbing. And so the analogy that I use in my book is, there's a saying, I thinking that he was about to kill me. He was thinking that I was about to kill him. He was about to kill me, and that's why I had to kill him. It's somehow it goes like that. It's a phrase from a wargaming specialist who was the thought leader behind wargaming, Thomas Schilling, and that's how it happens. When you have two people pointing guns to each other, each one of them is highly motivated to pull the trigger first because he thinks he's about to get killed. You understand? And that's how it
Yeah,
happens.
except on one side, it is just egg on the face. I mean, if the US backs down, it is not an existential crisis for this country. It isn't. It just isn't. But it is an existential crisis for Russia if they allow us, if they back down and we just get right up on their borders like we are, that is an existential crisis for Russia. So the trade-off is it's more like one is going to be killed and the other one would just lose. I'll take some egg on our face to prevent a nuclear war. But from the way
But
that you're
we're not
framing
in
it,
charge.
Russia, we're not in charge, right? Unfortunately, we're not in charge. But we should take some egg on our face to prevent a nuclear war. Russia's not viewing it that way. To them, it is die. It's nuclear war or die. And to us, it's nuclear war or lose. I mean, my God, just lose. Just lose. That's a better outcome overall. It's just like with Afghanistan. We lost. We got out of there, egg on our face. But okay, but now what? I mean, what did that? And all of these Americans had been gaslit for nearly 20 years, believing that if we withdrew from Afghanistan, all hell would break loose, right? Like some existential problem would happen. Nothing happened. Nobody notices at all, whether we're in Afghanistan or not in Afghanistan. Nothing changed for Americans. And that's a lesson that Americans should learn. Nothing changes. Absolutely nothing changes for you. So if we were to back down and not expand NATO and not antagonize Russia, nothing really would change for the United States. We would just go on another day. We wouldn't even know. But Russia, if they were to back down, it would be a noticeable difference potentially for Russia. There would be some serious consequences internally in the country. I mean, there would be potentially a lot more because we wouldn't stop. I mean, if they back down, we would do, okay, here's our opportunity. Now we're right up on your border. Now we'll just go in and finish the job. So we just need to get some egg on our face, just like we did with Afghanistan, and move on with our lives. But they're not. I mean, this is what's so frustrating about it. And what you're saying is Putin is serious. And obviously the invasion in Ukraine should have shown us he's serious. He's dead serious. And he's not going to back down from this. And we are escalating ourselves into a nuclear war because one leader is dead serious and the other one's just playing games, war games. And then they play these war games, as you say, and every single one ends up in nuclear war and they just ignore him. I mean, that is absurd. This is full on in not only incompetence in our government, but this is criminal. This is negligence. This is criminal. This is hostile to the American people to be doing this to us, to be marching us. I mean, these people should go to jail. Every last one of them should be in jail for escalating to this point. Why should we have to risk our lives in nuclear warfare for these idiots in Washington?
This is why President Trump swore to hold everyone to account who has been impoverishing the American people. I mean, the Afghanistan war is $2.2 trillion. Iraq and Syria is $3 trillion. Okay? and we're giving, another 200 billion to Ukraine. But when we have a hurricane, our people get, pennies. And
Yeah.
somehow there's never enough money for a regular hardworking Americans. And that's why, the American people chose Donald Trump again as their commander in chief. That's why he won every possible swing state. So people want change. They now understand, like you said, that people in Washington do not have their best interest at heart, that they just want to continue this gravy train. They want to continue these wars. And so, yes, let's just hope that Trump and his team straighten out this chaos. And I can't wait, until he gets to the office. But unfortunately, we have almost 60 days still where this can just really, really massively escalate with this new hypersonic weapon. Now, I'm waiting to see what President Biden decides to do. And my assessment is that we're going to do something because, like I said, they can't possibly accept an egg on their faces. And it's going to really depend on what that is. Putin's reaction is going to depend on what that is.
Well, also, Democrats have proven to be completely deranged in that they will do anything to collapse Trump and his presidency. So if they escalate us into a nuclear war just before he takes office, they would love nothing. I mean, this is how deranged the people in Washington are. Again, it's not about the American people. It's about their own personal gain. Democrats are looking at it as, here's an opportunity. It's like the pandemic. Why don't we just hand Trump basically like a pandemic, right? But this time it's nuclear warfare that will devastate the economy, people will die. It'll be terrible. And guess what? That means in 4 years, we get to win because we could point at Trump's failures and how the country's worse off now. And so we'll win. I mean, that is their deranged thinking. And so I am worried about these next 60 days that they will march us into further escalations just to hand Trump a disaster, just for the sheer glee of handing Trump a disaster, because they're just idiots. Like, everybody's an absolute moron. I just really worry that, when even with Trump, even if we do make it past these 60 days, and even if Trump gets in, again, he's only in for 4 years. And this is Russia, like China, plays the long game, and they see the writing on the wall for the long game. And I don't know how we ultimately prevent this, what seems like an inevitable escalation at some point.
And I will add, I completely agree with you about the derangement syndrome that the Democrats have. I will add one thing. There's a line of thinking among some of us is that the reason why the Democrats and the deep state are trying to walk us into nuclear war with Russia is to declare national emergency, so to extend Biden's rule and the deep state's rule, because Biden is probably not the one making these decisions.
Of course not.
Because
of course not.
It's very suspicious that just a little while he thought that he didn't want to allow nuclear war, and then now he does. So clearly someone else is pulling the strings there. And so if they declare that national emergency, it would derail Trump presidency. So there's that line of thinking. I'm not sure. I believe it, but that's what some people believe, and that would fit exactly into the pattern of derangement, because after all, they threw everything in the kitchen sink at Trump, right? The 2 impeachments, the Russia collusion,
tried to kill the guy.
Exactly. I mean, in America, and what is stunning to me is that it's normalized. Like, it's normalized, and we're not even a third world. We're not a third world country. We're not Russia. We're not China or North Korea. Like, we're America. You're trying to kill a U.S. president? Are you kidding me?
So one of the things that I hear a lot, I get asked this question a lot, and it is Putin a dictator? You know, I get this from the Democrats when they want to escalate war with Russia. They want to, they don't understand why I don't want to escalate war with Russia. And then they say, well, is Putin a dictator? Answer the question, is Putin a dictator? Um, with the thinking, the reason they're asking that question, obviously, is because they're thinking that we, America, should rescue the Russian people from this terrible dictator that they're suffering under. And my response is always, I don't know if Putin is a dictator. I don't live there. So, and I don't care. It's not my problem. Like, that's, the Russian people are smart people. They're capable people. They know how to use poison, as you say, right? So if the Russian people wanted to make change at their government, they would do it. I don't think we Americans are special in some way to where we need to go in and rescue people from their governments. The Russians will figure that out. But then, of course, I get called a Putin asset, or, because I won't answer the question whether or not he's a dictator. But ultimately, they're asking that question because they're saying we should rescue the Russians. What is your take on that? Do you think we should rescue the Russian people from this dictator? Your dog has an opinion on this, by the way.
No, we should not rescue the Russian people, and here's why. I will answer the question whether Putin is a dictator or not. Yes, he is. He's a dictator. But that's the type of leader that the Russians prefer. Okay? Putin it has always been a dictator. Always, always. That is because the Russians always need a leader. They feel that they need like a modern czar type of leader who is going to pursue a very strong policy and protect Russia. Because again, Russia has had multiple wars throughout its history, right? And they want someone who is firm and stable and has a strong hand. And Americans don't understand that, right? So, but the evidence of why the Russians want that is Putin's approval rating traditionally ranges, like hovers between like 78 to 82%. I mean, think about that. Any Western leader couldn't dream of that kind of approval rating, even at the lowest, when it dropped only to 59-60%. And when
is that real? Because whenever anybody says these numbers of a really high approval rating for Putin, people say, "Oh, but that's just that's what the government says, but that's not what the people really think." Do you think that those approval ratings are real?
Yes, I was about to answer that question, because this is the same question that I am asked when I quote these statistics. So let's say the difference, let's just say 10%, like we would allow that some people are afraid to say the truth. No, it's not just, by the way, just the Russian government that says that. It's independent statistics coming from something called the Levada Center. The Levada Center is actually designated by Putin's government as a foreign agent, okay? So Putin does not trust them. So, and the Western analysts trust those statistics, those people who actually follow Russia. But let's just say some people are afraid to acknowledge, and let's just say minus 10%. So you still would have, let's say, 64 to 75, still super high, right? It's much higher than in America, where our country is effectively split up. So, and if you look at history, again, like, yes, you can have like a one-off, but throughout Russian history, they've always had a strong leader, bordering on brutality. I mean, Stalin, who killed, and Ivan the Terrible, right? Ivan the Terrible killed his own son. Stalin. But the Russians right now, a big chunk of the population, they worship Stalin. And these are people who are not deranged. These are people because they believe that in order to preserve Russia as an independent country, I mean, Russia is not like America. I mean, they don't,
Mhm.
and there are a lot of countries like that. If you look at, if you look at China, if you look at
Right,
Afghanistan, they don't want democracy. They believe democracy is destabilizing. Look at, they
right,
believe that what we have, that it always goes to the extreme, the democracy thing. Look at what happened with the whole, transgender craze, right? In America, uh, Putin actually just banned the adoption of Russian children into countries that allow transgender surgeries. They don't believe all of that craziness stuff that women can
right,
compete in men's sports. And they believe that it is democracy that leads slowly and gradually to that kind of, crazy stuff. And they don't want that in their country. So
right.
unfortunately, our own Democrats have given a bad image and a bad name to democracy, on which principles this country was founded. And now all these foreign, populations, they view it in a really, really wrong light. It's because of
It's
what they
interesting.
created. Yeah.
Right. It's very interesting you say it like that. So yes, Putin is a dictator, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's what China, I mean, I'm half Asian, so I grew up very intimately understanding both Western and Eastern mentality. And Eastern mentality is different. I mean, it just is different. And it's hard for me to explain to people who just have Western mentality that Eastern mentality, they don't view a strong leader and having one leader as antithetical to freedom to their in fact, it almost, they think that it gives you more freedom when you're prosperous, when your country is strong, you've built up, you have resources that you share. Even there's, it's a whole different mentality that's very difficult to explain. And as a kid, I struggled. I remember both sides of my family, my mom and my dad and my mom were divorced. And so I would always have to explain to the other one, why one was thinking or doing something that they were thinking or doing. And the other one just would not understand, like, why would your dad be that, like, why is he that way? Or my dad, why is your mom that, what? and and it's, when you, like, you having been born and raised in the Soviet Union and then coming over to America, and you have an intimate understanding of both mentalities, and that does make you a valuable asset in the intel community. It's unfortunate that they ousted you the way that they did, but having that unique perspective and trying to get, because the Western mentality is just automatically, no, a dictator is just automatically bad. Or, having somebody like Xi Jinping is automatically bad. But the Chinese are like, no, this is working out really quite well for us. And why would we get rid of somebody and change it over with somebody when we have a perfectly competent person? And if the person is doing a great job and they're perfectly competent, why would we swap them out? That doesn't make any sense to us. So that's kind of the thinking for, a lot of, and I'm sure with Russia, it's a different, maybe different reasoning for doing, for wanting the particular type of government that they have. But all the more reason for us to just stick to our own problems, right? Let's focus on how we correct our government, how we fix our system that works for our mentality and our culture and our traditions, and build it up and make sure it's strong. And if others around the world want to have something similar to ours, and if enough of the people in their countries want that, then they will figure it out. We don't need to go rescue them or change it or tell them what they should have, because they're all just a bunch of deranged people. And that's ultimately what we're saying about, it's very insulting to say this about the Chinese or the Russian people. Like, you're all just deranged. And that's why you're okay with the dictate. That's why you're okay with the government the way that it is, because you've just been brainwashed and you're all deranged. I mean, how insulting on people who are perfectly intelligent and capable of thinking for themselves without, the derangement. But you know what? Our government insults us American people as well by saying we're all deranged because we've all been buying into misinformation, and Russian bots came around and we all just gobbled it up. And that's how Trump ended up being president twice, right? Because we're all a bunch of idiots. I mean, that's what they think of us. That's what they think of Russians. That's what they think of Chinese. One last question for you, Reb.ekah. I want to know, when you say, your book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America, the plan to defeat America is what people are afraid of. They're afraid that there is this, that we either defeat them, like you said, it's either they kill us, we kill them, or they kill us. Is Russia looking to kill us? I mean, what do you mean by defeat America? What does that mean in Putin's mind, do you think?
What this means is that if America comes to kill Russia, then Russia will defeat America first. And that's what it means. It doesn't mean that Russia is actively going, come and invade America. But what Russia has assessed, Russian intelligence services, that it's just a matter of time before, let's say, we deploy forces, the United States, because this is what they have seen happen in other countries. Like in Yugoslavia, we came in and got involved, and the country collapsed, right, into several different countries. Afghanistan is a different story, but that's what happened in Iraq, right? Saddam Hussein was removed. Libya, Muammar Gaddafi was removed. And then coupled with the rhetoric that comes out of the White House and the Pentagon, such as Putin is a dictator, he's a war criminal, he cannot remain in power. The Putin takes those things at face value on the Russian people. They think that we are going to come, we're going to deploy forces, we're going to try to do a regime change in Russia. They don't want that. And so the plan was developed as a response to what we are doing. And if we are to deploy forces, which has been the playbook, they've got a plan, right? They've got a plan B for that. And that plan includes everything, including nuclear use.
Right. Okay.
Does that mean that the Russians out of the blue gonna lob a nuke into the United States? The answer is absolutely not. They don't want to do that.
Okay.
But they want to have a capability to do that, and they want to have many capabilities below the nuclear threshold, such as, take our power grid down, right? Conduct a devastating cyber attack on financial services, transportation, and those are all precursors. They want to have a full spectrum of weapons and non-kinetic means to try to de-escalate. The strategy, the plan is de-escalatory. It is called escalate to de-escalate, because they want to signal, don't go here, don't go here. Don't try to get Ukraine into your sphere of influence, or else. The plan does not mean I'm going to go in and invade America, or I'm going to go in and invade Poland. Those people who say, by the way, that if we don't support Ukraine, Putin is going to invade Poland, they're either incompetent or they on purpose are trying to provoke the war. There's no way Putin is going to go into Poland. And I have an article written in Newsweek on that. And that is because Putin, unlike a lot of Democrats, is not deranged. Invading Poland means that Article 5 of NATO gets activated, and then the United States can legitimately place boots on the ground, right? And that's when Russia can lose, because unless it crosses the nuclear threshold. Because conventionally, NATO and the United States are superior. Russia is a bit superior in the nuclear realm. Putin does not want to trigger that. He is happy to have his strategic security perimeter, of which Ukraine is part of, and he doesn't need Poland at this time. And that is the situation. Now, if we were to dismantle NATO, I can't promise you that Putin would not go into Poland, because again, they always try to take the window of opportunity to expand its territory, because its traditional strategy, it's called trading distance for enemy's blood, because again, Russia experienced many wars throughout the history, but the enemy has to cover all of this territory, all of this strategic buffer before you can get to Moscow and to St. Petersburg. And that's how they protected the seat of the Russian government. So they want to
Interesting.
expand that. But if you don't encroach upon their strategic buffer, just maintain that stability, but maintain robust force posture in Europe as well. Don't try to get there, but to get into Russian buffer, but still maintain, pay for their own security, not to provoke, because weakness is provocative. But stability, there's even a concept in the Russian doctrine is called strategic stability, and that is that there's a balance of forces, and if the balance of forces maintained between Russia and the United States. Now, unfortunately, there's a China in the mix now, right? So, but if there's a balance of forces, none of the major players have the motivation to invade the other because they would meet an unacceptably damaging retaliation.
Mm.
So it makes sense?
Yeah. No, very interesting. Very interesting. So we're not at threat of Putin defeating America by toppling us and turning us into the USSR or doing anything along those lines. That's not what you mean when you say defeat America. You just mean defeat America in their plan to encroach on Russia's security.
That is correct. That is correct. But it's a book that needed to have a title that draws people's attention, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean, and
it
it
needs to
does.
be it needs to be relatively short because you can't explain when people who read that, they understand
Right.
what exactly that means. But you can't, in one title, you can't explain like if this then that. The plan
Yeah.
does exist to defeat America, but if America tries to defeat Russia.
Russia. Interesting. Putin's playbook, Russia's secret plan to defeat America. Reb.ekah Koffler, thank you so much for joining us. Very fascinating. I think I'm going to read this book. I don't read, I have a lot of authors that come on the show, and a lot of them, I think they're interesting or the book's interesting, but I don't really have like an urge to read it. But this one, I think I do, because especially as we're inching our way towards this nuclear war, I think it's so wise to get that insider mentality. And you have a very unique perspective, and you've been right throughout all of this. And I appreciate your. Now I have to think about like NATO, for example. I had one opinion, but now you've shared a different perspective that makes me rethink that opinion. And so perhaps it's okay for NATO to be where it's at, but not continue forward with Ukraine and Georgia, and and go further. And so some definite things to think about. Really appreciate your time here. I know the book is being re-released with more information. March of this coming year is when it's going to have. Are you adding chapters? Is that what you're doing for this current war?
I'm adding additional information about the war, basically why this war was unwinnable in the first place. The victory for Ukraine has always been mathematically impossible. I'm adding information on why Zelensky's plan, the so-called peace plan, is not a viable plan, and some other things.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Reb.ekah, for being here and giving us this insight. Would love to have you back, and whenever there's things that happen with Russia, and maybe you could give us some more of your great insight. Would really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on your show, Kim, and God bless everybody.
Thank you. And I do have all the links down below to grab the book and to follow Reb.ekah. So all of that is down below. Thank you, Reb.ekah.
Thank you, Kim.
Well, that was an absolutely fascinating conversation. Honestly, I just really, really enjoyed that conversation with Reb.ekah. Would love to get her back on to get her perspective throughout these the conflict. Hopefully, it will de-escalate. But I have a feeling, unfortunately, I'm usually optimistic when it comes to wars, and I'm usually wrong. So it's probably not going to go the way that I'm hopeful. But what a fascinating conversation. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for being here. If you have any comments, questions, you can email me, kim@kimiverson.com. Otherwise, we're going to be back next week. We've got another great show. Hope you guys have a really great weekend. Hope you guys had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. We'll be back Monday with another great show, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Until then, guys, have a great weekend. Good night.